All right, let's jump right into this explainer and completely dismantle pretty much everything you think you know about the brain's most famous chemical. You know, if you've read literally anything about productivity, habits, or the brain, you've definitely heard of dopamine. It gets tossed around constantly in pop culture as this magical pleasure molecule that just makes us feel good when we eat chocolate or scroll on our phones. But frankly, that popular understanding is entirely backward. So as we explore the actual neuroscience today, we're going to see exactly what this highly complex neurotransmitter actually does and why calling it a pleasure chemical completely misses the mark.
So here is our roadmap. We're going to start with the myth, zoom in on the biochemistry, map out the brain pathways, decode actual motivation, and finally, look at the clinical impacts. Okay, Section 1, the myth, rethinking dopamine.
Dopamine is absolutely not just some single-purpose feel-good juice. It's actually a catecholamine, which is a specific type of chemical messenger, and it acts as a core part of the brain's diffuse modulatory system. Think of it kind of like a giant broadcast antenna. It's sending signals far and wide across the brain to regulate incredibly diverse functions. We're talking about everything from the literal mechanical coordination of your body's movement all the way up to the deeply complex psychology of motivation and reward. It is a very, very busy multitasking molecule.
All right, moving to Section 2, biochemistry, making the molecule.
Let's actually look under the hood at the molecular engine here. Dopamine is built from a precursor amino acid called tyrosine, and this happens in a quick two-step process. First, an enzyme called tyrosine hydroxylase, or TH, converts that tyrosine to L-dopa. Now this is a massive deal, because TH is what we call the rate-limiting step. It literally dictates the speed of the entire assembly line. It's heavily regulated by things like calcium levels and end product inhibition, just so your brain doesn't go completely rogue and make it uncontrollably. Then, right after that in step 2, an abundant enzyme called dopa decarboxylase swoops in and rapidly converts that L-dopa directly into dopamine.
But you know, once dopamine has done its job in the synapse, it doesn't just hang around. The brain has a ridiculously efficient cleanup crew. First off, there's this selective reuptake process where sodium-dependent transporters act like tiny molecular vacuum cleaners, sucking the neurotransmitter right back into the axon terminal. Once it's safely back inside, the brain basically runs a recycling center. It either reloads the dopamine into vesicles to be fired again, or if it's done for good, it gets enzymatically destroyed by something called monoamine oxidase, or MAO. It's a ruthless, highly efficient system.
Which brings us to Section 3, brain highways, major pathways. Zooming out from that microscopic molecular level, let's map out the major highways. While dopamine-containing neurons are scattered all over the place, there are two massive neural networks starting in the midbrain that really dictate how this system drives our behavior. First is the nigrostriatal pathway. This kicks off in the substantia nigra, which literally translates to black substance and shoots up into the striatum. Its primary gig? Regulating voluntary movement. It essentially handles the actual mechanics of initiating motor responses to the environment around you. Right next door, we have the mesocortico-limbic pathway. This one originates just medially in the ventral tegmental area, or VTA, and projects out widely into the frontal cortex and limbic system, especially the nucleus accumbens. You'll often hear this called the brain's reward system. Its job is to assign value to our actions and reinforce behaviors that help us survive. So, just to recap, one highway handles movement, the other handles motivation.
Let's dive deeper into that in Section 4, motivation, wanting versus liking. All right, here is where the paradigm completely shifts. Modern neuroscience basically demands that we split our understanding of reward into two totally different categories: hedonic impact versus incentive salience. I know, fancy terms, but hedonic impact is basically liking something. It's that actual subjective feeling of pleasure when you consume a reward. Incentive salience, on the other hand, is wanting something, that intense, gripping motivation to go seek that reward out. And here's the kicker. The research absolutely proves dopamine is not about hedonic impact. It's not about liking. Dopamine is entirely about incentive salience. It is quite literally the chemical of wanting. To really nail this down, look at this wild stuff from animal research. Scientists have observed animals where their dopamine axons are completely depleted. What happens? Well, they literally stop eating. They lose absolutely all motivation to seek out food. But, and this is the craziest part, if researchers place sweet food directly onto their tongues, the animals still show liking responses. They smack their lips, they clearly enjoy the taste, they still have the capacity for pleasure. But without dopamine, the drive to actually seek it out, the basic drive to survive, just vanishes entirely.
So if it's not pleasure, how exactly is dopamine motivating us to do things? Well, think about this for a second. What happens in your brain when a reward is surprisingly better than you expected it to be?
The answer is this beautiful mechanism called reward prediction error. Basically, dopamine neurons act as prediction error signals. Studies show these neurons fire like crazy when a reward is better than expected, like, say, getting an unexpected treat. Even cooler, they eventually learn to fire at the cues that predict the reward, which drives you to act before the reward is even there. But if you expect a reward and it completely fails to show up, the firing rate of those dopamine neurons actually drops. This error signaling lets the brain mathematically update its expectations and repeat behaviors that lead to better outcomes. It's reinforcement learning in action, literally prepping your body and mind for survival.
Let's wrap up with Section 5, Clinical Impacts, System Malfunctions.
Remember that first brain highway we talked about, the nigrostriatal pathway responsible for movement? Well, when those specific dopamine-producing neurons in the substantia nigra start to degenerate, it creates the organic basis for Parkinson's disease. Because that pathway is supposed to trigger motor responses. Losing it leads directly to the tragic physical symptoms of Parkinson's. We're talking hypokinesia, which is a severe lack of movement, along with resting tremors and muscle rigidity. The engine of movement is perfectly fine. It just completely lacks its chemical key.
Then, let's look at the other highway, the mesocortical limbic system. Over in the realm of psychiatry, there's this massive scientific framework called the dopamine hypothesis. It suggests that the positive symptoms of schizophrenia, specifically things like hallucinations and delusions, are actually triggered by an overactivation of D2 dopamine receptors in this exact pathway. Essentially, the brain starts incorrectly assigning extreme value, or salience, to internal noise, or totally irrelevant things in the outside world, creating a distorted reality. That's actually why conventional antipsychotic drugs, neuroleptics, work by specifically blocking those D2 receptors, just trying to turn down the volume on that overactivation. We also see some massive impacts when this system gets externally hijacked. Addictive drugs like cocaine and amphetamines go right after that cleanup crew we talked about earlier. They literally block the dopamine reuptake transporters, so massive amounts of dopamine just get trapped out in the synaptic cleft. This chronic overstimulation forces the brain to protect itself by downregulating, basically building a tolerance, and that results in powerful cravings during withdrawals because the system's baseline function is crashed below normal. Now contrast that with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, which is linked to genetic abnormalities in D4 and D2 receptors, as well as the dopamine transporter itself. In that scenario, therapeutic stimulants like Ritalin are used incredibly precisely to inhibit those transporters in a controlled way. This boosts the dopamine effects just enough to help restore normal motivational and attentional function. So we've gone from the assembly line of a single molecule, driven down major brain highways, totally shattered the pleasure myth to reveal the truth of incentive salience, and looked at what happens when the whole system breaks down. But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought here. Our dopamine system evolved over millions of years to keep us alive. It drove us to seek out incredibly scarce, life-saving rewards using careful prediction errors. So how exactly is this ancient, deeply ingrained neurobiology supposed to handle a modern world that is just absolutely overflowing with hyper-stimulating, artificial, and instantly accessible rewards? It's a question that basically defines modern human behavior, and I really hope this explainer has left you hungry to learn a bit more about the incredible machinery operating inside your own head.